Hey everyone, this is Stripped Down Spirituality, a podcast where I attempt to answer your questions about spirituality, life, and whatever else you bring me. My name is Lezli Goodwin. I'm a minister with Centers for Spiritual Living, which is part of the greater New Thought umbrella, and I seek to teach universal spiritual principles through the lens of science of mind. This is the very first episode of this podcast, and so we're going to find out together how it's going to go. But if you're a spiritual seeker, if you are building your spiritual practice, if you're just curious about life, let's find out together. So I'm going to answer 5 questions per episode, maybe 6 if one of the questions is really short. And the questions that I have today are from posting on social media that I'm going to do this, and so already we have quite a bank of questions in the queue. So let's get started. Questions 1 and 2 are basically shades of the same question. So I'm going to read them and then I'm going to answer them together in one answer. So the first one is, wait, don't you have another podcast? Why start another one? And question 2 is, so how will this be different from your other podcast? So let's tell a tale of a podcast. So I do have another podcast. It's called Sexy Spirituality, with the idea being that everything is exciting. Everything is part of spirituality, not just the, super holy topics, whatever that means. And it has had 2 seasons and it's been on hiatus for quite a while. And the reason is it is a group conversation podcast where I get a group together and we have a conversation on a given topic. And what I found was that I was having a hard time getting it to meet my vision, which was not an interview podcast, but a group conversation. And also there was so much editing and doing all the minutia of running a podcast that I felt like I was spending very little time on the spirituality side and a lot on the admin side. And at a certain point, something had to give, and Sexy Spirituality was the thing that got put on the back burner. And it's been on the back burner for a good long time now. Now, flash forward to 2026, and I had found myself really in love with a knitting podcast on YouTube. For people who don't know, I'm an avid knitter, a relatively new knitter, super obsessed in the first blush of my new passion. And I was loving this podcast called I'll Knit If I Want To by Andrea Mowry, who's a well-known person in the knitting space. And her podcast, she jokingly refers to it all the time that she's very low tech, and she just put her phone on a shelf, like balanced it on a shelf, and didn't do any edits. Sometimes in the early episodes, the phone would fall off the shelf and she'd just laugh and put it back up. Didn't edit any of that out, and just answered people's questions about knitting. And I found myself thinking that is the kind of podcast that I would be willing to do, where I'm mostly talking about spirituality, the big picture talking about spirituality, and a little bit on the admin side, and also not cleaning up my mess ups. I was admittedly an over editor in the past, trying to take out every too long of a pause or every and so I'm not going to do any of that in this. I'm just going to invite people to ask questions. I'm going to be here in my messy home office, and so you'll get to see all the phases of mess that my office goes through, and just answer questions. And you know what? I'm going to be willing to keep doing it as long as y'all are willing to keep submitting questions. So together, I guess we'll find out what this new podcast is going to be. So I hope that answers those questions and whichever ones also have popped up since I started talking. Okay. Question number 3. Why is spiritual community important, and what if I just want to meditate and be alone? Excellent question. And so here's the deal. You can just meditate and be alone. You can do all of your spiritual seeking on your own if that is what works for you. And I have found, and many teachers have said this and found it to be true, there are certain things that we just can't learn by ourselves. that they are learned in relationship and in community. And some of those things, including finding our hidden beliefs and our woundedness, it's just a lot easier to do that when we're in community, because the value of community is probably exactly the same reason why some people want to avoid it. It's the kerfluffles that happen along the way, the ways in which we bump into each other, the ways in which we don't show up as pure love and light in certain moments, getting our feelings hurt, feeling left out, feeling taken advantage of, all of those things that become like internal storms, they create an opening for us, and it's an opening for healing. So for those of us who have gotten our feathers ruffled, not to minimize it, sometimes it's really, really deeply hurtful and like life-changingly hurtful. But for those of us who are on the receiving end of the kerfuffle and find ourselves really asking a lot of questions and digging within, it has given us this bright spotlight on our wounded space. We know it's a wounded space because people say things that I don't agree with all the time, and it doesn't particularly affect me. I'll just think, oh, it's interesting that they see that way. That's not how I see that. And then sometimes somebody says something and it just goes to that spot, you know what I mean? And it really can take me down. And that's when I know that I have an unhealed place in me there. And then my invitation is, should I choose to accept it, is to do the work in prayerfulness, maybe working with a practitioner or a counselor to heal that wound within myself. If we're just alone all the time, we don't really get the opportunity to see those things because we're not often hurting our own feelings. And on the other side, for those of us, which is probably all of us at some point, who have been the button pusher instead of the one that got their button pushed, said the wrong thing, said it the wrong way, didn't include somebody, hurt somebody, we also get the invitation on that side of it to go beyond defensiveness and to go beyond the hurt in our own heart that shows up there, and to be changed by the experience, to look at life differently, to learn about the person that we hurt or the area that we didn't understand that caused that hurt, and show up differently. And again, we're not often sitting alone in a room calling ourselves into that different level of beingness in our own self that pushes us to grow and to expand. Also, there is this whole aspect of loving, of being loving and creating a loving space and learning what unconditional love is, that is really hard to do in the theoretical. We learn, we go beyond the intellectual into the heart space by opening up into the practice. And the practice of love often requires the presence of others. So do you have to have spiritual community? You don't. But there are a lot of opportunities waiting for us within the practice and spiritual community that I think makes it worth it. Okay, question 4. What is your biggest challenge in your ongoing spiritual journey, and how have you or do you deal with it? I've had lots over the years, but I think that the one that shows up for me most frequently now is the places in which my personal beliefs and my learned and intentionally grown beliefs and practices around spirituality don't match the teachings that I'm teaching in, or don't match the way in which other ministers and practitioners have historically or even currently walking that out. So my favorite example for this that's up in my life is around science of mind specifically, and healing, physical healing. It says in our What We Believe statements that we believe in the healing of the sick through the use of this mind, which is the one mind, the shared unit of consciousness. And I believe that. I do believe in the healing of anyone through prayerfulness. I think that we always get our prayer answered, and it always is a healing. What I don't believe is that it's always a cure. And a cure, just to plan some definitions, a cure is a cessation of symptoms, a stopping of the symptoms of an illness or an injury. And a healing is anything that changes our heart, our mind, our consciousness. So I believe that we're always healed. I believe that we're healed every single day, that we have the opportunity to dig in and be part of practice and be part of life, that we receive healing. I don't believe it's always a cure. And I think that science of mind in particular is really, really good at dealing with short-term illnesses, things with an end date. So things like cancer, which I do not wish to minimize in any way. It's awful. It's such a terrible challenge to go through. And there's a goal there, right? There's, the point where you get to ring the bell and you're finished with treatments and you made it. And there are an awful lot of ways to be in this world that don't have an end date or even a finish line to keep in mind. So I'm talking about chronic illnesses, I'm talking about neurodivergence, I'm talking about mental health challenges, where they are integrally a part of somebody's experience. And here we have this teaching that says we can heal you with a prayer, and when people interpret that to mean we can cure you right here, right now with this prayer, I think that it sets up an awful lot of challenges. One of them is that people's faith get really hurt when they are not immediately cured through one prayer. Yes, I think we're heading in the right direction when we pray, and I think that we've all had the experience of praying for a cure and not waking up the next day completely cured. As somebody who has multiple chronic illnesses, I know one of the ways it can show up is this sort of low hum idea that a person doesn't have a consciousness of wholeness if they don't present as completely physically perfect, the right weight, the right look, the right amount of energy, the right level of ability. And people pick up on it. They pick up on that hum. And I've noticed a trend through the years that an awful lot of people, when they're going through serious treatment or have a diagnosis, they disappear from community. They disappear from the place where they get the most support because they feel like they're not doing it right. And if we are all one in the oneness, which is what all New Thought teachings share, we're one in the oneness, then there can't be anything in our physicality or our mentality that automatically makes us not a part of that oneness and that wholeness. And I feel like that's what we're saying when we are setting people up to be cured. Is there anything to cure in some of these things? Or are these just bodies that operate differently and beautifully? And B, is that something that pushes them outside of the oneness? Wholeness is not a transient state. Wholeness is a spiritual quality. And if we're all made of the one, then every single one of us is inherently whole, whether we are showing up with an illness or a neurodivergence or not. And so I find myself pushing back on this a lot. I find myself speaking about it a lot because I think it is a place where we have oversimplified spiritual truth to get a pithy punchline. And reality is more rich and more complicated. And I think that our community members and people who study this teaching deserve the whole story. Now, I am aware that there are some ministers and practitioners who would hear this from me and say I'm watering down the teaching, and I just don't have the consciousness to create a full healing. And I would say that that is their right to believe and to say. I just don't agree with them. And so I just keep going back to my practice, keep going back to the writings, find what I think is true, find what I can stand behind, and be willing to reevaluate on an ongoing basis. Great question. Okay, So we have one more question here. Never mind me while I scroll my list. Okay, so this question comes from my friend Sandy, who I have not seen in ages. Hey, Sandy, thank you for the question. And Sandy comes from Unity primarily, so that will flavor this question. He writes, how is it possible that a church called Unity has 5 principles and none mentions others in any way? How is it that CSL's list of principles states we believe in the direct revelation of truth through our intuitive and spiritual nature, and that anyone may become a revealer of truth who lives in close contact with indwelling God? So no one on the entire planet has actually added anything worthy of inclusion to the beliefs in a century? Excellent question, Sandy. Excellent question. Whew. Okay, a lot to unpack there. So let's start with Unity. And I will say, first off, I am not a Unity minister, and I don't know enough about Unity to speak definitively on this topic. But I will say what I know about New Thought in general. And that is that both Unity and CSL were created in the early 1900s at a time when society and spirituality really was very focused on the individual mental experience, the consciousness. Everything happens in consciousness. Every change begins in consciousness. And so really focused on what happened on the inside of individuals. And a big part of that is still true today, but it was really solely focused on that at the beginning. And I think that that's why we don't see them talking about others, is that they were really focused in on what happens inside the individual. Additionally, I think that they were really focused on highlighting the differentiation between themselves and regular Christians. So both Unity and Science of Mind originally thought of themselves as a form of metaphysical Christianity. I think Unity still holds on to that. Centers for Spiritual Living, less so, though there are many, many, many people in our communities who definitely consider themselves Christian, metaphysical Christians. And in the early 1900s, the United States, which is where both of these teachings were born, really was a Christian nation, not a politically Christian nation. It wasn't declared a Christian nation, but it was full of lots and lots and lots of Christians, the definitely majority Christian country. So I think that Ernest Holmes and Charles and Myrtle Fillmore were putting the emphasis on what was different about Unity or about Science of Mind than every other Christian denomination that was being taught in the United States at that time. And from their perspective, traditional Christianity has a lot to do with others, with how you treat others, how you behave, how you show up. And I think that they would have considered that obvious. Everybody knows that. And so they were highlighting the piece that was different and really focusing in on that. And I think that's part of how the others sort of never made it into the mix. I think that they would have considered that everybody was already doing that. Everybody knew the golden rule, or what we like to talk about now, the platinum rule, which is not do unto others as we would have done unto ourselves, but instead do unto others as they would have done unto them. That's the platinum rule. So let's turn to the part about CSL, because I know more here. How is it the CSL's list of principles has not changed one word in 100 years, despite the fact that we say right in the Declaration of Principles, or what we call the what we believe statements, that we believe in the revelation of truth through anybody who chooses to live in close proximity with the one, with the divine. And I would say it is in the word principles. So in Science of Mind, principle is used as a synonym for quality of the divine. So a principle is something that is unchanging, is permanent, is ineffable, not fully knowable. It is something that you can count on because it doesn't change. Spirit doesn't change. Everything in the manifest reality, people change, but spirit doesn't change. And so we wouldn't change the principle. We would change how we talk about the principle. We would change how we use the principle. We would change how we understand the principle. The principle itself would not change. Just as an out picturing of what a principle is in Science of Mind. So let's talk about the what we believe statements. So that is a document that was written by Ernest Holmes in the late 1920s. And it was originally what I believe. It was written for a journalist who said, okay, I get it that you don't believe that God is like a man in a throne in the clouds, making rules and smiting people, but what do you believe? And he sat down and very quickly wrote this list of things that he believed, and it was popular. And so over time, we've changed it to we believe, and we utilize it in things like practitioner graduations. Practitioners are lay clergy, ministerial graduations, events. We love to use it in events, and we often teach it in classes. And it is very much in that sort of distant academic language about what we believe. And so we wouldn't change it because that's what Ernest wrote. And it's a quote, so we wouldn't change it. Now, that doesn't mean nothing has changed about how we approach our principles in 100 years. And it's literally 100 years this year. I think Science of Mind, the book, was released in 1926, and I'm speaking this in 2026. In fact, within the last 10 years, we created a whole new system in Centers for Spiritual Living that talk about principles, practices, and methods. So these take 10 principles, and they're literally a word and then a paragraph explaining that word. And each thing is a key aspect of the divine and how we understand it. And then it carries through to how we practice it in our spiritual practice and what method we would choose. So let me give you an example. Let's say I was working on love, on unconditional love consciousness, and I wanted to grow my ability to love, even leaders of the world that are doing things that I don't like or wouldn't sign off on or don't approve of. How can I hold those people in unconditional love consciousness when I sometimes get very angry in my personal brain, right? How do I do that? So it talks about love. That unconditional love consciousness is sometimes called the Christ consciousness, and that place where even if we don't have a relationship with someone anymore because they are dangerous to us or harmful, or we can't heal that relationship, that we still want good things for them. We do not want revenge. We want good for them. So I would take that and I would look at what spiritual practice I might look at. And so I might choose practicing the presence, which is a way of feeling the truth of the divine within myself. And then I would look at all of the methods that are available. And one of them that is available is meditation. And so I might take that meditation on unconditional love consciousness into my practice to help me anchor in that principle more fully. And so, yeah, we are including that system. I say it's a new system because I've been at this a while, but it's not really new anymore. I have practitioner students who have graduated that every single one of their classes included that system. And so, yeah, so it's not brand new anymore. And I believe that should a time come when more clarity is needed on that it will continue to show up. There is a phrase in Science of Mind called open at the top, and that is that's what Ernest Holmes called it. And what he meant is that the depth of the teaching doesn't end with him, that anyone who chooses to have an active spiritual life, to connect with the divine within, will become a revealer of truth, and that truth should be built into the teaching. And so we see that in classes that, we teach classes that don't have any Ernest Holmes books attached to them. We're still working with the principles, but we are approaching it in a new way. So I hope that answers your question, Sandy. That I can't say how that's showing up in unity, but I believe that it likely is, because where we see good unfolding one place, we can look around and see it in lots of other places. And so love to you, my friend. I hope that we cross paths sometime soon. And that is what it looks like to answer 5 questions on this podcast. I did have some friends say, oh, you have to do more than just answer questions. Like, you have to have little recurring segments. So I decided to add the segment, what am I reading? Because here's the deal. I am always reading something. In fact, I always have 2 books on the go at any moment. I have a nonfiction, or what I call my serious book, my learning book going. And then I always have a very silly, simple, mind-numbing fiction book going at the same time. And that's, some people watch a lot of TV. I don't watch a lot of TV for whatever reason. I listen to audiobooks. My fiction is almost always audiobook, and I do it while I'm knitting. And so I guess that's why I don't watch TV, because you have to look up from your hands, and I'm not a good enough knitter yet that I can knit without looking. So what am I reading? My nonfiction book came to me, shout out to Christina Smith, who turned me on to this book, and it's called Shatterproof: How to Thrive in a World of Constant Chaos and Why Resilience Isn't Enough, by Tasha Eurich. And I'm really enjoying this book. It talks about how for the longest time, all of the research on trauma and positive outcomes was really focused on this idea of resilience, and newer research isn't bearing that out. I think that people thought it was just a given, and it isn't bearing that out. And so talking about what else needs to be in place, and how not to just over rely on this concept of resilience. That there comes a time when even the most resilient people run out of, like, the resilient tank runs out. And I especially appreciate being recommended it by Christina Smith, because she is someone who is extremely high functioning in the world. She's a CEO and does amazing things. And I have watched times in her life when the resilience has run low for really, really legitimate reasons, like both of her children being dangerously ill. And she has continued to find ways to work through and move forward. And so I'm working on Shatterproof. And then my fiction book, okay, so if you like warm, cozy mysteries that are not complicated and have some sort of paranormal element to it, you would probably like my fiction reading list. So right now I am working on the Federal Bureau of Magic Cozy Mystery series by Annabelle Chase, and I'm on the book Every Picture Tells a Fury, and I love them. They are so delightfully mindless and calming and peaceful. And so I often have a book going that has witches or other supernatural creatures that just sort of adds another element to the mystery. I don't know. I find them fun. So Annabelle Chase has a number of series that are fun if you like listening to that sort of thing. Definitely not spiritual, except in the sense that everything is spiritual. And so there you go. And then what is up for me? I'll always give you one of these two. What's up for me? I have a new class starting this week, pardon me, and it's called Education Reimagined: Transformative Learning. And it is for people who are teachers of adults for spiritual topics, whether it's classes, workshops, facilitations, or if they want to do those things. It's a 2-part class. The first part is transformative learning, and then there'll be another part offered in the fall called transformative teaching. And both of them help set people up to teach spiritual topics. Everything from how to deal with what you're afraid will happen, like what if they have a question and I don't know the answer, or what if I can't get control of the classroom, through how to handle time management, how to take care of all the different learning styles, how to lower barriers to inclusion, anything that you can think of that would impact your ability to be an impactful spiritual teacher is included in this class. So I'm teaching it through CSL Home Office, through the Professional Development Department. The class is May 6th to 27th from 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. It's important that you remember Mountain Time. That's Wednesdays, so it's a 4-week class, and you can sign up on csl.org under Education and then under Professional Development. Or in the show notes under this, I will put the link. You can just click the link. And I hope if that's something that interests you, that you'll consider joining the class and having fun with us. It's a pretty small group, lots of one-on-one help. It's good stuff. And that's the podcast, friends. If you found this interesting, please like the video. And if you want to see more of it, consider hitting the subscribe button. Both of those help more people to see it and will also help you. If you want to click the notifications button, then YouTube will let you know when I post another video. I will be posting these as well as, I post all kinds of different stuff, almost always with a spiritual flavor to them. And so if you find it interesting, you are invited. If you have a question that you'd like to ask for a future podcast, the link to submit the question is also in the show notes. So underneath the screen you're looking at right now, there's probably a little word that says more or 3 dots. If you click that, it'll open up and give you the notes from this session. So that's the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe learned something, come up with some questions to ask me. And hey, I would love your comments. If you could hear my dogs barking in the background, if you wish you could have heard my dogs barking in the background, if you want to know what I'm knitting, or most especially, any thoughts about spirituality or what you'd like to see on the podcast, please go ahead and put those in the comments. I look forward to being with you next Friday for another episode. Thanks so much for tuning in.